Welcome to Every Trait, the Pro Biopunk Philosophy channel. We're still in phase one, the practice videos, the pop culture videos. Today we're going to be doing something very different. We're going to be going over how to make characters with both human and inhuman traits mixed together more realistic. Genetic fiction basically has a moratorium against it, and one of the reasons is it's hard to do. And it's hard to get the characters to look right. Now, I don't need to tell you how to make a character that looks entirely human, but just is using genetics as an excuse to have some power or whatever. You just write them as a human. So we're going to be going over how to make them move more realistically, how to build them physiologically more realistically, put everything in the right place, and even how to make them act more realistically. So we're going to start with the feet and work our way up the body all the way to the head, and let's get started. So we're going to start with legs and feet, and the two kinds I want to go over are digitigrade legs and reptiles. The rest of them aren't that hard. Birds already walk on two legs. Plantigrade, that's what humans already are. So we want to go over the two that are done wrong the most. We're going to start with digitigrade. So digitigrade means you're standing on your digits, just the fingers, right? So if you have a pet, if you have a cat or something, its paw is your fingers. You'll see another joint up from the paw, and before that joint is a claw on the side of the foot, the dew claw. That's the equivalent to your thumb. All mammals have equivalent bone structure. So what does that mean? It means they're only walking on the front of their feet. So on the legs, it'd be like this, standing only on the tippy toes, right? Okay, the problem with digitigrade legs and how they're animated and how they're made to move, whether it's CGI or old-fashioned animation, is they only walk on the front of their feet. And this makes them feel very much like they're on stilts, like they're on prosthetics. It doesn't feel real, it feels wooden. Now, you might be saying, well, that's what digitigrade means. It means you walk only on the front of your feet. Right, but you saw what I just did, right? I went like this. I'm plantigrade, so how can I do that? I can do that because I have more range of motion than just standing flat. And it works in reverse too. Digitigrade things can go back to the ankle. Now, they're not going to have the big ankle bone like a human does. But if you do have a pet, you can feel the bottom of that bone is flat and the top of it's rounded. They can put weight on it. They are meant to. So people who animate animals and then animate a hybrid type will animate the animal correctly and the hybrid wrong. And that's because they're using real footage for the animal. And for the hybrid, they're having to make up their own rules in their head. And so one of the rules they make up is, oh, it walks only on the front of their feet. But that's what makes it feel so wrong. That's what makes it feel so fake. A real living thing is going to use its full range of motion. Not all the time. Like, I'm a real living thing. I don't walk around like this using my full range of motion, okay? But they should use their full range of motion when it makes sense, okay? So what are some things you could do? Squaring off for combat, right? Up on just the paws, okay? Go back all the way to the ankle on the back foot so they can jerk forward if they need to, that sort of thing. That's more full range of motion. Just like something that's plantigrade can stand up to change a light bulb, something that's digitigrade can go back to the ankles. It makes it look much more realistic, especially if they do that before they're about to jump. Or something's falling from overhead, they brace it, right? And it can even be more casual things, like they're waiting for someone who is late and they're bored and they're frustrated, and so they're doing this number. Shifting their weight, right? So it'd be more exaggerated, of course, if the ankle was all the way up here, but yeah. Or how about this number? Headphones on, right? Listening to music. Now, they probably wouldn't go all the way to the ground in that case. If it's just part of a dance, they'd probably only go like 80% of the way down. But still, that range of motion will make them feel much more realistic. Now, moving on to reptiles. For reptiles, if it is an uplifted reptile, meaning it's not supposed to be part human, if it is purely reptile, most reptiles are animated like dinosaurs, not like reptiles. And the reason is a reptile cannot articulate its limbs under its body. And for something standing on two legs, that means it can't do this. Okay? So if it's purely a lizard with no mammal DNA mixed in and no dinosaur DNA or anything, bow and arrow, bad idea. Staff sling, that might work. So combat claws, jump forward, dig in, that might work. But remember, they're not going to have full range of motion. Sword and shield, a little bit exaggerated on my part, but yeah. So if you've ever seen the lizards that run on two legs, their legs splay out, and that's why they can't really go under. So this is only, again, if it's an uplifted, which is an old biopunk term for when a species is made to be intelligent by another species. Like if humans were to decide that a species of lizard needs to be sapient for some reason, but didn't want to use human DNA in the mix. So very specific circumstance, but still. Next up, we have the tail. It's important to note that most tails cannot grasp. I see this a lot. I see species that do not have grasping tails grabbing things. I saw this in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie where Splinter did it. I kind of give Splinter a pass because he was hyper evolved by alien goop. He's not supposed to be exactly just a rat person, but still, it looked ridiculous. His tail like stretched out and wrapped around something. It was so dumb. If the character is created for a logical purpose, like they were created as a super soldier or something, they shouldn't even have a tail unless it serves a practical function. And grasping tails, of course, do. Swimming tails as well. But it's the counterbalance tails that serve a big purpose and are most likely ignored. So when counterbalance tails are drawn or animated, they are usually done in a way that is where they're just an accessory. The most extreme version of this I've seen is a character wearing a spacesuit with the tail stuck out the back. It's like, that's dumb. It's part of the body. That would not work. So a better thing to do is to actually show it functioning. So what are the functions of a counterbalance tail? Obviously balancing, of course, but running at full speed, the tail spins out as you turn, so it turns you faster because it's a counterweight. And this wouldn't be of any benefit to a regular person. But if you had digitigrade legs, going back to that, if you had increased strength to weight ratio, both of those things combined will let you sprint very fast. And then having a counterbalance tail to turn faster would make sense. So other uses for it, practical everyday uses. You're carrying an awkward load out to one side, you use that to balance it out a bit. Another use could even be in combat. Now, it's not strong enough to attack. Counterbalance tails aren't very strong, typically, but it could be used to balance opposite the direction the weapon is swinging. In some cases, you might even be able to use an oversized weapon. Now, the reason why oversized weapons were not typically used in history is because you don't need that much force to actually end a person. And if it weighs too much, you're going to lose power in the swing. It's trying to get to the ground, okay? It's not trying to get to your target. But if the counterbalance tail was strong enough to hold weights on it, to like strap some weights to it, swing the weapon, tail swings in the opposite direction, your body is the center point and it's causing you to spin so you don't lose as much power. Now, there's still a limit. You still wouldn't want to go too oversized with a weapon, but a tail with weights on it used to increase your spinning with a weapon. I've never seen that in fiction, but it makes sense to me. Now, I'm not a physicist, so maybe I'm wrong, but just think about practical uses of it. It shouldn't just be an accessory. That's the point I'm trying to get across. It shouldn't just be an accessory. Speaking of which, claws. Now, claws, because they're on the feet and the hands, we'll go ahead and do them now, are a terrible weapon. There are characters in comic books like Cheetah in DC and Tigra in Marvel who use their claws as their primary weapons. I'm telling you, they're both morons. Tigra has a running thing where she feels inferior to other heroes. Well, she should, because she never bothered to learn a real weapon. Any weapon is better. A crowbar is better. Anything with reach, a staff, anything is better than claws, especially on a human hand. Look at how small they'd be. They'd be like little box knives, the tiny sized ones, right? So it would be pretty useless. Unless it's a kung fu story and they're mixing that into their martial arts or something, that's okay. Or it's used as a backup weapon only. And even if it's used as a backup weapon, it should primarily be the feet. The feet claws would likely be bigger, especially if we're going back to digitigrade again, because the legs would likely have to be, the feet would likely have to be slightly larger so the joints don't break down walking on two legs like that. So yeah, the foot claws could be quite large. So you've got an assault rifle. You're shooting over here, someone's running up at you over here. You could whip the leg out, slash them, right? How about this number? Someone grabs a person on this side, someone grabs a person on this side, someone comes up the middle and starts beating them up, right? And the reason why the people are holding them is so they can't drop to the floor. So what you would do in that situation if you had claws or talons or something is you would drop your weight on purpose. So now they're holding you up early. The person comes down the middle, you raise both your legs, and they no longer have a face. And they no longer have well, they do still have internal organs, but they're not, strictly speaking, internal anymore. So, foot claws could be useful as a backup weapon, but claws should never be a primary weapon if you mean to take the character seriously, especially in a modern or sci-fi setting. They should use guns like everyone else. If they are a hybrid and they're only going to fight as an animal, what's the point of the human part? Why not just train an animal? That would get you the same result. So, yeah, they should definitely not use claws as a primary weapon. Use them as a tool for everyday things, cleaning out things out of grooves, or they have a box they need to open, and so they just open the packing tape with their claw. So, practical uses, everyday uses is fine, but they shouldn't be a primary weapon unless it's like a martial arts story. But this is a thing I've never seen done in fiction. There's this silent threat that you see sometimes in fiction and in real life where someone goes, right? It doesn't need any words. It's like, I'm going to be watching you. You better watch yourself, right? What if you did this instead? So you point to your eyes, point to their eyes, extend the claws. That's a threat. That is, I'm going to be watching you, and I'm going to get you if you do something wrong. That is another level to the threat, right? So, and it's a cool little number that I've never seen a character do. But, okay, moving on. We've already gone over quite a bit. So for the upper body, all that's really left to talk about is the wings before we get to the head. So wings, you're not going to like this. If we're going for realism and not fan service, wings are pretty much a bad idea. You have to sacrifice a lot to fly. So the wings are the arms for most species. So like, unless we're talking insects, and you can't make an insect the size of a person, the carapace, they would collapse under their own weight. It doesn't work. You can't just scale things up in physics. Okay, so a bat's wing, the fingers are the wing bones. That's why bats have a little claw at the apex of the wing. And the fingers are just stretched out and there's skin between them. For a bird, that's fused up. And the feathers do the work. In both cases, they're using their chest muscles to flap their wings. So if those muscles are in use by your arms and the wings are on your back, that doesn't make sense, right? There's nowhere in the bone structure for them to fit in on the back either. You could add dorsal fins to the back maybe, but that's about as much as you can add to a chordate back. So there's room in the skeleton for a tail, but there's not room for wings in addition to arms. So a most realistic winged character, the wings would be the arms. But then how do you manipulate objects? How do you do day-to-day stuff? You could use a foot to do it. I've seen that in fiction where they're just fully like a bird and they use a foot to grab things. But that's kind of inconvenient, right? There's one idea I've had for a long time. That's where you have multiple fingers and extra fingers. And so imagine you have a couple extra fingers, right? And the two extras and these two make the wing, leaving a little three-fingered hand at the apex of the wing. So the wings fold up and you can still manipulate things. Now you wouldn't be able to use your hands while flying, but it's more realistic. Another way to make flight more realistic is to shrink the character down. The shorter they are, the easier it'll be for them to fly. So, and I've had this idea for flight for a long time, and then I just saw it like just a couple weeks ago in a Star Wars series. There was a little owl-themed character that was short and had fingers at the apex of the wings. So someone finally did it after all this time. So another solution for flight is to be in a planet that has low gravity. If you have low gravity, you can get away with a lot more. You don't need the wings to be as oversized, et cetera, et cetera. I wrote some books a while back that I never published. I mean, I threw them up just to get them off the docket, but I never advertised them or anything because they weren't very good. But I wanted to have some characters fly. I wanted there to be a flying race, and I couldn't find a way to do it biologically that made sense because they were as tall as humans and they had a lot going on. They needed their arms. So they need their arms to be fully arms. So it just didn't work. So the solution I came to was to give them wearable technology to fly. Harnesses kind of like what you'd wear with a parachute, but with wings on the back, fully organic looking, like synthetic organic, like bird wings. And the harness itself had musculature running through it, so it would flap the wings, not the muscles on the chest. Those would still be for the arms. And then there was a subdermal neural net underneath the skin at the base of the neck that would link up with the device so they could feel and move the wings. And so the wings were detachable. They were like something they'd wear. And I really think that is the best way to go about it for flight. Now, obviously, bird wings, not the most optimized. So if you have that level of technology, you could probably just have some sort of jetpack or something. But still, and we see this in fiction sometimes with like Falcon in Marvel, right? Flying around. But I really do think wearable technology, because you have to sacrifice so much biologically for flight. Take Aarakocra in D&D, for example. They are said to have hollow bones, but they're not vulnerable to blunt damage or anything, so it doesn't really make sense. They're the height of a human. They have full-length arms. They should not be able to fly. They would need chest muscles out to here. They would need their legs to be greatly reduced. They would need to have their wings in place. I'm describing a bird. I'm describing an actual bird. There's a reason birds are shaped like that. So yeah, sorry to say, flight with wings on the back, very unrealistic. There are workarounds, lighter gravity, optimized body that's as light as possible. I've seen some people put the wings lower, so it's like you imagine muscles down here doing the flapping. The problem with that is you would need a sternum that goes all the way down here, and then you would be very rigid. You wouldn't be able to move your body as much, and the aerodynamics would be horrible. So moving the wings down does not actually fix the problem as much as people think. I wish I could give you better advice on wings, but wings are just not very realistic on a human-shaped body. Humans are not optimized for flight. If humans were to fly, our wings would probably look more like bats than birds, because bats are more closely related to us than birds, even more closely than you might think. I mean, we're both flattened front to back, whereas most mammals are flattened left to right. Reproductive system, the brain structure is similar to that of a primate's as well. Whatever came before proto-primates, I think that split to proto-primates and bats. So like they're actually like the closest relative to primates. It's kind of crazy, but that's why they look so creepy to people. They look like little mutated, But moving on to the face. So there's three things I want to talk about with the face: the eyes, the ears, and the mouth. So, and of course forehead and all that. There needs to be enough brain volume for it to be a sapient person. Now you could throw in a line of dialogue that says, oh, we made the brain more efficient pound for pound. Sure, but if the level of technology being used is more primitive, like if it's a story that takes place only 50 years from now or something, that's probably not going to be an option. So we're going to talk about all that. So for the mouth, if the mouth is shaped significantly differently, it might need to move the mouth differently to make the same sounds. And so a lot of times you'll see people trying to map human mouth movements onto something that looks nothing like a human, and it comes across very strange. It comes across feeling like gummy, like rubbery, like it just feels weird. And I'm not going to map out full mouth movements for different shaped faces today. That would be like a 10-hour video, but it's just something to consider. Now, when talking about the eyes, people on any kind of gene mod or hybrid usually put the eyes further apart. But here's the thing: if the face is flat, like a human face, if you're only going with like a little bit of hybridization in the character, the eyes, there's no reason for them to be further apart. The reason they're further apart for some predators and things is because they have a muzzle or a beak, and they don't want that blocking their field of view, so the eyes are further apart so they can see past it better. So if they don't have that, there's really no reason for that. I'm not really going to talk about eye size. That's a stylistic choice, but I am going to talk about ears. The worst example of the ears thing was the Cats movie. Here's what it would look like if that was a human. Even if it's an alien race, people instinctively expect the ears to be in a certain place. And that place is very easy. It's right at the end of the jaw. Right at the end of the jaw is where the ear is. So think about animals where the ears are really high up on the head, like a rabbit. Their skulls are like all jaw all the way to the top, right? And their brains, especially for like rabbits, really small, so their ears right at the top. Animals with the ears more to the side, okay, they have a more normal sized jaw. Humans have a very small jaw, so our ears are pretty far down, and we have big foreheads too. So where should the ears be on a hybrid that has a human-shaped jaw and animal ears? Right where human ears are, just kind of sticking out. And you can see this in the Pillars of Eternity setting. And the actual games called Pillars of Eternities were better than Avowed. But in Avowed, you can see a more close-up version of an Orlan, which is a race that has animal-like ears, but they're in the location that human ears would be. And that's actually correct, physiologically. That's actually where they would be. And it looks all right. You don't get as much uncanny valley from them as you would have if the ears had been just going into the top of the brain for some reason. So if you're trying to figure out where to put the ears, now if there's a jaw, you put them higher. If there's an actual like muzzle, like a bigger jaw, you put them higher. If there's more of a forehead, you put them lower. A good rule of thumb, if the character does have a beak or a muzzle, well, if it had a beak, they wouldn't have animal ears, I guess, but unless they're an alien that has a weird mix of traits. But yeah, if they have a muzzle, you can look at an adolescent animal, an animal that's like a few weeks old, because when they're newborn, they have foreheads. So like take a cheetah, for example. A cheetah has a forehead when it's first born. And as its skull gets bigger, its brain doesn't really get that much bigger, so its forehead disappears as it grows up. This is true for most mammals. Their foreheads kind of go away as they get bigger. And so you can look at an adolescent, see where the ear placement is, and that's about where it would be on a hybrid. So, and generally, if you get it just 50% between where it is on a human and where it is on the animal, it's going to look right. You don't want to put it all the way on the top of the head because presumably your character has a bit of a forehead if they're part human. So, yeah. And that'll help the ears from seeming weird and wrong and stitched on and gross. Ear placement has to be correct to avoid that creepy feeling. So now that we're done with ears, we've done legs, we've done tail, we've done wings. All that's really left to go over is personality. So if you don't want the character to come across as a cartoon, do not have them do stereotypical things for whatever they look like. Now, that doesn't mean you have to ignore the fact that they have non-human traits. You can include that in the story, but it should be practical uses of those different traits. Maybe they can eat different things. So maybe they can eat raw meat, or maybe, again, like I said, using the claw to open a package, or maybe in winter they dress lighter than other people because they have a winter coat that grows in. Maybe they're nocturnal, maybe they're awake at night. Physiological differences are how you show the other side to them. You should write their personality as entirely a human, and that's because we only have one example for what a sapient chordate would act like, and that's humans. If they are supposed to be an uplifted animal rather than a hybrid type, then you might want to lean more into the animal's instincts. So for example, I mentioned a rabbit earlier. A rabbit person would be incredibly timid. They would likely avoid danger at all costs. They're a prey species. So that would affect their psychology. They would be more prone to being anxious. They would have higher anxieties, things like that. They would be more of a pacifist. They wouldn't want to fight as much. Meanwhile, you can just think of any species and throw in its stereotypes then. But if it's supposed to be human as the starting point and then again those traits like a biopunk setting where you're using biomodding in place of cybermodding, then you want to just write them as a human and only acknowledge the non-human traits as they affect things physically. Otherwise, don't even bring them up. Now, that'll make them seem much more realistic. Now, we're going to talk about dialogue briefly. I'm going to use two dialogue examples from tiefling characters. These are characters that look entirely human, except they have horns and a devil tail. It's a Dungeons & Dragons thing, which then got ported over to Pathfinder as well. We're going to use one example from each. So there is a Pathfinder character in the game Wrath of the Righteous named Woljif who will sometimes say, "My tail is twitching. Must be a sign." And that makes sense. Like if tails like that can twitch. And that's a counterbalance tail like a cat or a lemur has. And those tails can twitch. And he's basically saying it's a nervous thing that happens when he senses danger. So if he's near a trap and he's like, something feels off, tail starts twitching. Okay, see, that fits. That dialogue's not bad. Now I'm going to give you an example of a bad dialogue. Because sometimes writers feel compelled to draw attention to the character's physical differences in dialogue, and they don't think about whether the dialogue makes sense. So there was a Neverwinter Nights 2, I believe. There was a tiefling character who, if you wanted to talk to her, she would sometimes say, "Go ahead, I'm all horns." I'm all horns, in reference to the fact that she has horns. The problem is you don't listen with your horns. So that doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, go ahead, I'm all toes. Go ahead, I'm all nostrils. That doesn't make any sense. It's nonsense dialogue because they wanted to shoehorn in some mention of her being a tiefling into the dialogue. That doesn't work. So you can use additive dialogue, but you also have to do one other thing, subtractive dialogue. If you're using additive dialogue, make sure it makes sense, like the twitching tail, not the horns. If you're using subtractive dialogue, how to do this is, if the character has a physiological difference that makes them not able to do something a human does, they shouldn't mention doing that thing, right? So I can think of an example from Mass Effect. There's a race in there that's covered, that has sort of like bug-like faces, and they're covered in kind of carapace / scales, right? And there's one of that race, and he wakes up, and he's telling you a story, like feeling guilt and feeling nervous and everything. And he tells you, I woke up in a cold sweat. I'm pretty sure you didn't. I'm pretty sure you didn't wake up in a cold sweat because you don't have sweat glands. So how did you wake up in a cold sweat? That is not something that species would do. So the person writing the dialogue forgot that they were writing for a different species and put in a human thing that doesn't make sense in that context. That's what I call subtracting something from dialogue. So you don't have them say something only a human would say if they don't have the human trait associated with it. You know. So if we're talking about like insults too, insults can go both ways. Usually people use insults on variants like hybrids relating to how they look, but the insults can go the other way. So if they were going to insult a human and they have scales or fur or something, what might they call a human? Sweat skin. Because glandular skin that drips and it's gross, and it would seem gross to them. So they might call us sweat skins or something like that. So you have to think of it from their point of view, right? But otherwise, you do want to write them as a person. Insults can go both ways. Use subtractive dialogue, use additive dialogue, and only portray their physical differences as when they show up physically. Don't show the personality of being from the animal unless they are an uplifted animal. There is one exception. I know I was forgetting something. That's why I was going through the list. If the character is deliberately playing it up. So for example, let's say there's a setting where the animal people, the beast folk, the hybrids, whatever they are, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, where they're not that well trusted. And there's a character that's one of them and wants to disarm the people around them, wants to make them feel more comfortable and get them to underestimate them. So they act like the animal. They do dumb stuff. They do silly things. But it's all an act. Just to get them to see the hybrid type character as not a threat, as just something silly. It would be a manipulative tactic. But that's the only case, if you're writing serious fiction, where they should act like that, is if they're doing it deliberately. So I think I've gone over everything I wanted to. So I hope you got something out of this, something usable, whether you're writing purely in text or whether you're animating or something. I hope you got something usable out of this. As always, look at a skeleton of the animal, look at where things would actually be. Don't just stick body parts wherever you feel like it. Oh yeah, there is another thing I forgot about, and that's the tail. Really obvious point, really obvious, but it should be where it makes sense at the end of the spine. I've seen people put it like a foot up from there and like half a foot down from there. And yeah, just put it in the right place, okay? Anyway, all right, and I think that's all I had to say. So the next video is going to be about covert genetic fiction, because most people aren't into genetic fiction, so one way to get people into it is have a story start out not obviously being about that, and then slowly build towards that. And we'll be giving some examples of that, or at least one example of that in the next video. So, thank you for listening. I have been ZJ, and remember, always Gmod responsibly. Clicky, 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 clicky.